I've got to be careful because if I leave more than a second, you'll jump in there. So I need to act quick. Have you heard that episode back now? We've put it out.
No, I don't think so, no.
It's barely a second. It's like, I go, okay, let's go. And then you go, anyway, since Dan isn't doing it. And I was like, wait, what? It's amazing. Anywho, let's do a podcast. Hello,
and welcome to Stephen University. Dan's just made a joke about me taking over if he leaves it too long. And if I'm honest, we spent too long making the joke, spent too long pissing about. So, here's Chris. How are we all doing today?
We're okay. I don't think I'm going to survive this podcast at this rate.
This is the first of. We're not even just recording this today. This is the first of a few, and I'm already giving you shit. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Yeah. So this week would Jesus Christ. This week we are discussing Beach City Drift. Chris, what was it about?
Well, I mean, what an episode to watch in this climate. It's basically about a pervert. To
be fair, his real sort of pushiness was in his original episode. They just sort of that story.
But at the minute I saw, because for context, we're recording this at a point where just more and more allegations and people coming out of the woodworks. I know what you're thinking, guys. That doesn't put it in a set time frame. That could be any time. But yeah, so it's just when it was like, oh god, Kevin's back, is he?
We're actually catching up to the podcast. So this will be going out sometime in February. It's only middle of January now, so we're actually sort of only a month removed. So for those of you wondering what Chris is referring to, specifically the allegation that's hurt us this morning or sort of thrown us off is the Aziz one. So it was a bit. It is a bit weird to have read all those stories over the last sort of 24 hours. And then for Kevin to show back up, the guy that wouldn't take no for an answer. It's like it's really interesting. I mean, I really respect Steven Universe as a show for being bold enough to not only tackle it subtly in the way it did during the very first episode regarding Kevin, but even more so, I think, to double down and like not only bring the character back, but like have Stephen and Connie sort of explain he wouldn't take no for an answer. I mean, they're using sort of dancing as the allegory, but it's a real issue, and it is sort of a weird issue of consent, and it's so bold for a TV show to sort of for a kid show to tackle such a topic, especially in this climate.
It's crazy. And so I'll summarize first and then give my kind of highlight of that in a way was the episode starts with Greg's got a new car. It's actually a used car, or as he likes to call it, experienced. So Greg and Connie are helping him clean it and just helping him out generally at the car wash. This yellow cocky car screeches round. Turns out to be Kevin. Stephen and Connie get quite angry with him, but sort of pass it off as, oh, you just look like someone we know. Kevin's quite rude to Greg, quite rude to them, and then buggers off being all arrogant and stuff. Stephen and Connie explain to Greg, what's happened and why. And then they decide to kind of get their own back a little bit by morphing into Steve Oni and racing him and using Greg's new car to race him in a sort of drift. It's not quite a drift competition, but sort of a street race, basically. The Steven Universe equivalent. They have the street race. He keeps jibing them, and then I'll come back to it in one of my favourite scenes of the episode. For example, he pretends to have a sick brother and stuff. I'll explain why that's one of my favourite scenes in a sec. And they goad him until they separate and conclude that this is exactly what he wants. Actually, he wants people to be obsessed with him. He wants to get that unreal gratification. So it leads to them deciding that they're just gonna take in the view. They're just gonna kind of relax, and they end up losing. But they go to shake his hand and are basically the bigger person. And this riles Kevin up because they're not obsessed with him. And then off they go. Oh, he sees them as the two little kids. He says something like two kids in a beautiful costume or something.
In a beautiful trench coat or something like that. Yeah.
That's it, in a beautiful trench coat.
Yeah, it's a good gag. It's a good
Yeah,
gag.
definitely.
Yeah.
The reason I love that scene is because when he starts talking about his brother, I was like, oh, are they going to go down this route? Are they going to give an excuse for the bad guy? Such a typical kids' TV route of doing things. And they don't do that. He's lying, and he reveals himself to be lying. And I just thought it was such a bold move to just have him be an out-and-out creepy villain and not have him have, at least at the moment, an excuse. It's one of my favourite scenes in the episode because I think it goes in a direction that you wouldn't expect a kids' show to go in. And what you were just talking about is a moment that sums up that. So I really, it's what it's. Look, I don't think it was as entertaining as more recent episodes have been, but it was very engaging. Touched upon some really adult topics, and whilst it is neither, I would say, the best or one of my favourites, I still think it was a very good episode. And there have been far worse. And I imagine if you're a big Steve Oni fan, for example, it was probably quite a thrill, and I could understand this being one of someone's favourite episodes.
Yeah, I think this is one of the better ones. I am a big Steve Oni fan, so I love any Steve Oni episode. So this episode really ticks all the boxes for me for a lot of reasons. You're absolutely right. It's an interesting sort of, not double standard, but a sort of, because we always say, oh, well, you want your villain to be empathizable, because a true villain, you want to understand where they come from. But a character like Kevin, who's not a villain in the sense of, he's not an obstacle really for the protagonist to overcome. He's in no way impeding Stephen and Connie, but from a sort of like emotional perspective, from a personality perspective, he riles them up. A character like Kevin, who's not a traditional villain then in that sense, because he's an antagonist in that he's antagonizing them. He's not in the way of them achieving something, is he? He's not,
No.
He's not, I'm trying to think of like Jasper or a Peridot in the early days, being some sort of threat to their existence. He is quite simply just present and an arsehole. And I think the difference is you want to understand the motives of someone who is doing terrible things, like a Jasper, like a Peridot, like maybe potentially, depending on how far we go down the line, a villain that they've set up like Yellow Diamond. You want some sort of motivation and rule set for them because you want to understand why they would choose to do those things. But everyone ultimately does need to learn the lesson that in life, you will just meet arseholes. They're everywhere. There's tons of them. And the best way to deal with those arseholes is to not engage with it. Don't stoop to their level. Do you know what I mean? Like, literally don't engage with it. And I think that an episode of television for children that has a character in it that is an antagonist in that sense, and you're right, has that brilliant moment where you think for a second they're going to undo it all the good, by giving him some sort of backstory, and instead they double down on it and make that him winding them up further. The story is him playing on Stevoni's emotional state. So not only is him telling that story like a double bluff for the audience, it actually expands on how much of an arsehole he is, because it makes him worse, because he's seen that Stevoni can get emotionally attached like that and has exploited it, and that makes him even more despisable, and that's really important, I think. And I think this is one of those instances where you want to hate the character. You really do. You want to, and are intended and designed. It is designed for you to dislike him.
Yes. Because I don't think someone like Ronaldo is designed to make you hate him. I think you and I have just decided to hate him. And I
haven't decided. I find him irritating. I didn't make a choice.
You hate him, Dan. And
I do always feel bad because no matter what we do, whenever we rag on Ronaldo, it might even be the same person every video, but there's always at least one person in the comments that's like, I like Ronaldo, and I always feel awful when we do that. Anyway,
and hello to you, that person. But
I've got to assume it's one person.
Even like you say, they've given most of the villains compelling reasons, and a lot of the villains have then become, in the long scheme of things, not actually villains. So very rarely does this show go, right, this character you will dislike. And how awesome that you're disliking someone that you that these kids will grow up to dislike. You're disliking a very human character.
Yeah, it's a person that you might run into in life.
Yeah,
and
we all do. Well, Hollywood is clearly full of Kevins, Dan. They're everywhere.
But I mean, forgetting Hollywood for a second. I mean, day to day, we all know people who not maybe as far as Kevin, but we all know arseholes. And you have to learn to deal with them. Because there will always be people.
Well, I know
a
fair few people that think you're an arsehole.
Exactly. I mean, and those people have got to deal with me on a day-to-day basis. I mean, look at you, for example. You've got to put up with me a couple of times a week. What a nightmare. Do you know what I mean? So this lesson, if you'd have seen this as a kid, Chris, you'd have learned better how to handle me early on. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is valuable stuff we're teaching kids here. Valuable stuff. And what a great way to use that. Go on.
Yeah, I'd have attempted to street race you years ago.
Exactly.
Even though neither of us could drive.
It's true.
Would have been a disaster.
But this is what I love about this episode is if you're a show like this, you only really get to do this person's genuinely an arsehole plot a couple of times. You can't waste good characters, and space on characters that are literally unpleasant because you don't want to populate a world like this with that. Especially not Steven Universe. It's such a wonderful sort of world they've created. Everyone's quite sort of what's the word I'm looking for? I don't even know. Everyone's quite sort of it's all quite a positive. It's a positive show ultimately. I think with a positive message. So you can't have too many people infecting the show with negativity or arseholishness, like Kevin. But if you're gonna bring one in, how awesome to use it to teach essentially children, really, because it's a message. It's something that you and I as adults have. I mean, you've dealt with me for many years now, so we've learned that skill over time, but the hard way. What a nice message to sort of hit kids with young. I just think I don't know. It's really valuable. And then the beautiful moment of Connie Stevonnie in the car just noticing the view. And no longer worried about beating Kevin because that's not important. And I think there's just something really fantastic in the storytelling of that, and I think that's really valuable. And it makes the character of Kevin again the source of a very important lesson on this show, and it makes you, while you don't like him, you understand his value because you think back to the message of Alone Together, which again tackles issues of consent and being pushy and. If someone, do what you want unless you're potentially encroaching on what someone else wants or doesn't want. You know what I mean? And I think that's that's a good thing to live by. You know what I mean? But, live your life, sure, but if you're what you want out of life encroaches on someone else in some way, then you need to rethink your priorities there. And I think that's a really valuable lesson. And so Kevin has been the crux of two great episodes in that sense. The only downside. Go on.
How long can you keep that up though? Because you say he's used like that twice more, and then you're lucky enough to be a writer on this show, and someone says to you, right, you do a Kevin episode.
Yeah, it's tough.
Surely you've got to at that point be thinking, well, the most interesting thing I can do or try and do with Kevin is to make Stephen and the audience feel sorry for him. To relate to him. Let's find out why Kevin is the way he is.
Yeah, but I would really, really strongly fight against doing that because I think it negates the good done here. Even if that might make for a more interesting episode further down the line, I think you've got to be careful not to undo the value of a previous episode because that is very tempting, and it certainly would be the easier route to go with another Kevin episode. So yeah, that's the situation. It's interesting because you're right. What do you do?
It wouldn't surprise me.
You are
if
between a rock and a hard place. Yeah, because where do you go now? Do you just never bring the character back unless you've got a good excuse to, or do you bring him back and do that, which is arguably the easy thing, or do you find another use for the character entirely, like you bring them back to have some other effect on the show beyond either a lesson or redeeming. You've just got to be very clever with how you use the character, I think, going forward, because he's proven to be valuable to the show. And again, that does not mean I like the character, because I know there's a lot of people out there who'll be like, "You like Kevin? What?" No, I like what Kevin does in the show. I like Kevin's position.
You like Kevin as a tool for the show.
I mean, he's definitely a tool.
Yeah. No, but like as a tool to do certain things with, like in this case,
yeah,
teach people a very valid message.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think that's the best use for him. Moving on a little bit, there's some interesting stuff in here about sort of non-binary gender. So obviously Stevonnie, because the other gems, they don't technically have gender. They tend to go by the she, her pronouns, but that's, I think, just because their form sort of tends to take a female, what humans would view as a female appearance. So I think that's maybe why that's happened. I'm speculating. I don't know. But what's really interesting, obviously, Stevonnie being both male and female is non-binary when it comes to gender, and are referred to by they, by other characters, particularly Jenny, says they, in the, when referring to Stevonnie, and again, the show subtly breaking new ground, because you don't watch a lot of animated shows, Chris. You've acknowledged this many times, but trust me when I say that these things are not happening on other Cartoon Network shows. This is right, okay. This is some of this is really groundbreaking stuff, and I think that again is nice representation. I mean, there have got to be people out there who have that sort of non-binary gender and have a great affinity for Stevonnie for representing that really well, I think, because it's not made a plot point. Stephen and Connie together is Stevonnie is non-binary, and that is just that. It's not a plot.
It's to the point where I hadn't even, like, I'd made the Kevin links, but I hadn't even sort of made that subtle link to I suppose a labeling issue, a transgender issue, that kind of subject. And I think the fact that I didn't make that link would suggest that actually, if being shown to a child, the educational purposes of that can be incredibly strong. Like you see all the time. Like, this is potentially a tangent, and I haven't thought about this enough to fully form the argument. So
that is always the exact moment you should definitely say what you're going to say. when you go, I'm not qualified to speak about this, and I've not thought about it enough to have formed a full opinion, but here I go. Love it. Yes. Full steam ahead, please, Chris. I'll have some of what you were going to say.
Luckily, YouTube doesn't have a habit of, harsh comments or anything like that.
Now, everyone on YouTube's lovely. Actually, to be fair, you see, we make that joke because YouTube does historically have a problem with the comment threads and stuff. Our listeners are the best, aren't they?
Yeah, we do.
You guys are absolutely incredible. Thoughtful, interesting. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Our listeners are smarter than we are, and they're not smug about it. It's when we say something stupid, and we do it weekly. They don't sort of go, you guys don't know what you're doing. Look what you're doing. It's acknowledgement of, hey, it's actually this, and that's kind of interesting that you thought that, but it's this and it's that, which is such an adult and clever, and it really does show the level of our listener. And I would rather have 100 views from these people than millions of views from all the other Bellends in the world, all the Kevins of the world. Yeah. So what an opportunity I've accidentally stumbled into to just thank you guys for being reasonable and honest. Because at the end of the day, we're all just assholes talking to a camera or talking to a microphone. No one on YouTube is above anyone, and no matter how popular their channel becomes. So I think it's really important that we don't treat YouTubers like there's some sort of authority figures, because that's what you're doing when you're going, but you got it wrong, but you're on YouTube, you're supposed to have it right, you're supposed to know better. No, we're idiots that picked up microphones. We don't know
just
what we're
so
doing.
Happens that we chose to record thoughts in this way.
Yeah, so you guys are all really respectful when we don't know what we're talking about, which is often. So thank you.
There's a lot you see a lot of people that talk about their parents or their grandparents being things like racist or homophobic, and I think definitely. It's very easy to go, how amazing is it that they didn't turn out like that, especially if those sort of things and negative terminology or whatever would have been said around them growing up. And I think TV plays a big part in that. I think as the millennial, as it's been, this is, I don't necessarily like that term, but how all the news sites reported recently about how Friends was being watched by a younger generation, or the millennials, and millennials were pointing out problems with it, issues of things like homophobia, because they're watching it with that viewpoint. And I think that Stephen University doing something like the Steve Oni They thing, as subtle as it is, that kind of thing will help, because the more that they hear that kind of stuff, the more it's an appropriate and a loving attitude is portrayed about that kind of thing in their TV. Maybe the more it stands a chance of overshadowing any negativity that might be going on by anyone else in their life. And I'm not saying everyone's parents are like that, but I know so many people that have directly contradicting views to the older generations in their family. And that has to be because of an external source. And, there's education in schools and the friends they keep, but there's also the media they consume. And I think that plays a big part in it. And by doing something small like this, Stephen University can play a part in it.
I think you're absolutely right, because I think back to like my upbringing. I think about watching like old episodes of Will and Grace, and that's not a show I was really like watched every episode of, sort of thing, but it's a show I very casually drifted in and out of. And I remember the very first time I saw it, and I realized that the lead character was gay. I was like, "Oh, cool, okay, interesting." Like, because in my head I went, "I've never seen that before," and then I went, "Why have I never seen that before?" And you shouldn't have to be normalizing things. That shouldn't be what the situation we're in. But sadly, it is. So it's important to ensure that children understand there is nothing abnormal about anyone who happens to be from a different country as you, have a different religion to you, have a different sexuality to you. There is nothing abnormal about anyone. Like everyone does whatever they want to do, and that's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with anyone doing that, being themselves. That's actually really awesome and a really important thing that people should do. And everyone else, there are a lot of very fake people out there not doing what they want to do. So so even for me, watching television in sort of the 90s as I grew up, even I got that out of shows like Will and Grace, and even Will and Grace was problematic in places.
Even like a big example I remember, ironically giving the news story I've just referenced, is Friends.
Yeah,
I remember like the one where Susan and what's her name?
Carol.
Susan and Carol. Susan and Carol getting married and never seeing a gay wedding on TV before, and just being like, "Oh, okay."
Well, that's the thing. I found some of the criticism of Friends to be fair, and some of it to be a little bit off-handed. Because the episode that keeps getting picked up on a lot is the one where I don't know if it's probably not called this, but with Friends you can't start a sentence with the one where, and people not assume you're referring to the actual title. It's the one where they think where they reveal that when you first meet Chandler, you assume he's gay. And Chandler keeps reacting negatively to this. And people go, "Well, look, that's homophobia." And I'm like, well, there is an element of that there, because obviously you could perceive that to be, the gag is Chandler doesn't want to be perceived as gay. But I think, again, it's subject-target, because to me, the target is a guy frustrated that he's having trouble getting dates because everyone he talks to assumes he's gay first. So it's not so much that you could perceive it, and I always took it as more he was struggling because, like, for example, that lady tries to set him up on a date at his job, and the person she's trying to set him up, as he says, he's a he, because he's like, because he's frustrated that it's hindering his ability to basically pull, which is I think funnier in my opinion, and a lot more true to that character. But I absolutely understand why people would perceive it that way. But I do think some of the criticism has been fair, and some of it has been a little bit misplaced. Because again, sometimes it's subject target, isn't it? You can make jokes about sexuality without sexuality being the target of the joke or the butt of the joke. Top Gear do stuff like that a lot, where, like, for example, I think that there was a joke where Richard Hammond said that only gay people eat ice cream, and everyone got really offended. And for a second I did, and I thought about it. I went, no, the joke here isn't that he actually thinks that. The joke here is he's playing the part of ignorant old man who he's playing that part. Yeah. The butt of the joke is himself for his ignorance, not the thought. But again, it's a difference between target and subject. We've gone a bit off topic, but I think but getting back to the point, I think it's really valuable to make sure you're exposing, and you shouldn't have to, but this is the society we live in, to people at a young age that these things are not abnormal anyway, and that it's absolutely fine if somebody's non-binary, gay, straight, doesn't matter, absolutely irrelevant. Are they a good person is what matters. Kevin clearly is not. So, and
Did you have any other?
You're absolutely right. Yeah, so there are a couple little things. First of all, they have a Twitter account running for Peridot. And when this episode aired, she was tweeting that she'd heard cars in the distance, gone to investigate the noise before giving up and going back to writing an essay on Camp Pining Hearts. Which I thought
that's awesome.
Which I think is lovely. The other one I thought was really nice is that Stevonnie is wearing Connie's dad's jacket. That jacket with the sort of
oh, cool. That's
feathery
nice
thing
touch.
at the back. That's Connie's dad's jacket, because obviously none of Stephen or Connie's clothes would fit. So they've obviously just picked clothes from everywhere, and I think that's a really nice touch. We've seen Mr. Maheshwaran in that jacket multiple times, so that's nice.
Yeah, that's an awesome touch.
Yeah, I thought that was nice too. What else? Anything of value here? No, I think that's most of it. There aren't a lot of like little, because usually there's a lot of like notes.
I just want to add, if you haven't got anything else, the animation of the actual the race itself and the view and stuff like that was done very well. I think it would have been very easy to do that cheap, but it felt like a legitimate street race, drag race,
Yeah,
and that was cool.
Apparently, I don't remember where I heard this. I think I listened to an interview with the person who storyboarded this one recently on, I think, the official Steven Universe podcast, which, by the way, as many times as I've made jokes about that podcast when it first launched, because it launched straight after we launched this, it is brilliant. Like, it's interviews with the writers, the creative team. Chris can't listen to it yet because he's banned until we've been through it all, but it is spectacular. Listening to Rebecca Sugar talk about some of this stuff so openly and candidly, and then listening to some of the other artists who created music for the show, and so the access that Mackenzie Atwood has been given to the crew and the voice cast is stunning, and every episode has been an absolute joy to listen to. So it's a really good podcast. If you like this, definitely check out that. In fact, I would argue check out that and prioritize that over this, but I probably shouldn't say that. But I remember an interview with one of the storyboard artists from this episode saying that she wanted this episode specifically because she knew it had a race in it and really was excited to animate that, but it turned out to be a lot harder than she anticipated. So there was some mild regret, but she's done a spectacular job. It's a beautifully animated sort of set piece,
definitely.
and the way it's done in that way where it feels actionful and suspenseful, but also sort of cartoony and comic-y, like when the way the cars unrealistically skid into drifts but are like right next to each other, but it's also like there's just something really tense about the way it's shot and also really vibrant. It's really well done. That element of this episode is also really good. I think that's pretty much everything.
Speaking of other things,
yes,
that I can't listen to, Dan is currently doing a playthrough of Save the Light. So I, go watch it and probably comment about how you're missing me. That would make me feel good personally.
Go find the episodes. Do that. Yeah,
go ahead.
Definitely. It's a weird thing. I just sort of accidentally. Well, I say accidentally. I've wanted to play around with it for years. The idea of doing some gaming videos. And I've never the capture cards are like £100 and upwards, and I just never. I thought, what if I'm bad at it? If I spend £100 on a capture card and I'm terrible at doing this, I'm gonna really regret spending that £100. So I've never bit the bullet. But
didn't stop you buying a ukulele, but carry on.
Feelings hurt. See what I mean, everyone? There's a Kevin in all your lives. Yeah, very good. Anyway, so what happened was the Xbox got an update that allowed it to record for up to 1 hour to an external hard drive, the video. And I thought, fuck it. Now's the time, I guess. I'd really wanted to play the Steven Universe game for a while, and I've been waiting because I'd heard the initial release was buggy, so I sort of held off a little bit until it got patched. It's had 2 patches now, and it seems pretty stable. So, I've been playing through it, having an absolute blast. I'm not sure if anyone who's watching is entertained by it, but I'm certainly enjoying recording them. So, I don't know how far into it I am at the point you're listening to this. In a month, maybe I'm done and it's all up. I don't know. So far, I've been releasing one a day, so theoretically, it's possible that I could be done by the time you hear this, and the whole playthrough could be up.
Not to peek too far behind the curtain. Then how many do you have in the bag if you're releasing one a day?
I've currently got the 2 are up, and I've got 5 recorded.
Right. Okay.
So
one a day. That's a lot.
Yeah, but if I play video games generally, I'll play for a couple of hours at a time, and if I'm splitting them into 40-minute chunks.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's one of those things where I'm doing it anyway, so it's like I might as well.
Yeah, no, I get that.
Editing them is super easy. I just literally slap the audio on the video.
I thought the other day, this is pathetic.
By the way, it's worth noting, by the way, that 1 a day thing may not hold up. Chris might be right, and I may end up when I'm back at work, because I'm off this week, so it's easy for me to get ahead. Maybe when I get back to work, I'll slow down. I don't know. Well, but at the moment, I'm sort of putting up 1 a day. There's no official schedule for it, just when I do it. I don't want it to feel like work, so I'm not putting any time frame on any episode of it. I'll just do it when I'm doing it.
I thought the other day, and I'm gonna regret saying this because I worry you might make me do it, or maybe if we get comments asking me to see through with this. But we're trying to eat better at the moment, so I thought about doing a YouTube series where I just review sandwiches as to give me the excuse to eat sandwiches.
I mean, do it. I
can't do this now because I've got an idea for it. No, I'll tell you the idea for it off air. But I did have one idea, which I'll tell you about off air.
Great. There you go. So that's something to tantalise you guys about. Throw it in the comments. We're a lot closer to the recording date now, so it'll be less of a gap for us to respond than it used to be. There was one point when we were 3 months ahead of ourselves, but that was just to get through all the bombs. Now we're back stably to a 2 a week sort of thing for quite a while, so we're not doing the Stephen Nuke. That would be suicide. So yeah, we're back to just sort of 2 a week, but we're about a month drifted, so I think there's a nice little gap, but nothing enough to keep us afloat, but also not so much that I feel like we're talking to you guys miles in the future. Yeah. So that's nice. Yeah. So yeah, that's everything for this week, I guess. I've been Dan Doolan.
I've been Chris Billingham,
and we'll speak to you next time as we discuss Restaurant Wars.